Welcome to this episode of Kennedy Saves the World. So, as people survey the damage from the LA wildfires from Pacific Palisades and Malibu all the way to Altadena, it's no longer a case of what bad things could happen with California mismanagement in governance. It's holy crap, what are we going to do now? Because so much has been lost to such sad predictability. And we need people in California who run things completely differently, who see things before they happen and mitigate the circumstances so people don't lose their lives, their livelihood, their assets, their kids' schools, and every memory they've had of once great places. California should not be like this. People should not have to suffer as they are. And, so much of this was bound to happen. It was like California was on a disastrous freight train heading right toward this conclusion. So what do we do now? I mean, that's what we have to focus on. We can point fingers, and I'm happy to do it, and I will for a long, long time. But most importantly, we have to figure out how we move forward. And I can't think of anyone better who loves the state more than Steve Hilton. He used to be one of our colleagues here at Fox News with his incredible Sunday night show. He's an author, and he's one of those rare thinkers that, has stayed connected to the political process, even though politics has gotten so ugly. He has remained dedicated to policies to truly better people's lives. Steve Hilton, welcome back to Kennedy Saves the World.
Yeah, well, Kennedy, thank you so much. It's great to be with you. I mean, you've been more directly affected than I have by this. We live in the Bay Area, in the northern part of the state. I've been in Los Angeles pretty much solidly the last week, but I mean, of course, you've had that direct impact. I've spoken to so many people like you who've been affected directly. I mean, you're in New York, but your house, the whole thing is just so upsetting. But compounding the fear and the anxiety and the what am I going to do next and when can I go back to my house and can I rebuild all those things. On top of all of that, there's this incredible feeling of absolute fury and rage. It's really interesting in Los Angeles. There really isn't anyone saying, "Oh, it'll be, time later to point fingers or what." No, people are furious right now because it's so evident that this was avoidable. That's the thing it makes it so much worse. I mean, I drove up PCH, Pacific Coast Highway, one of the most iconic drives in the world the other day. And we've seen the videos of that. That's where the Malibu coast, very widely shared videos of the utter destruction. And it was really interesting. We drove up, I was in a car with, actually, Pastor Jack Hibbs was with me and some other people.
And he's been amazing. And I know he has been part of your effort to practically get a handle on things.
Yes, and we were in the car, and there's a few of us, and driving up, and we were talking and chatting. It was really interesting. As we entered the zone, as it were, just everyone went silent. I mean, because you just can't believe it. It's so upsetting, because it was avoidable. I mean, we can get into all that, but I mean, the final point I just want to make in this, opening part of our conversation is, your show's title, Kennedy Saves the World. We need to save California. We need to save California, because if we don't turn things around, I mean, this is just the first instance of utter calamity. I mean, it really is the case. This is the greatest state, as far as I'm concerned, in the greatest country in the world. And we cannot let this continue. And that's my focus now.
And, the voters have allowed the monoparty system to essentially go unchecked. And what happens is when you're unchecked, you get people who really want power, who are able to manipulate their way into power, and then they make bad, questionable decisions. So, for example, in California, they spend more money on homelessness and they just have a larger homeless population with nothing to show for it. And you've got $12 billion that is supposed to go on to fighting homelessness. And we know homelessness has proliferated. And, Governor Newsom says that he doesn't even have the receipts. So while we know that is something that the more you throw at it, the worse it gets, fires, it turns out that the fewer resources and firefighters you have and operational equipment, the worse firefighters are, but they've been drastically cutting the fire personnel and operations budget. And what we were seeing Tuesday night, particularly in Pacific Palisades, was, reporters wondering, where is the fire department? And, now
Yes.
there are National Guards people, there are LAPD, LAFD, there are firefighters from around the state and from other states who could actually get there. They were stopped in Sacramento. Their fire trucks were stopped in Sacramento to make sure that they were up to the emission standards of California fire trucks. Like, never mind the fact that homes and businesses were burning to the ground. I read one report that FDNY had offered to fly firefighters out to Los Angeles. JetBlue was going to pay for it. And Karen Bass said no. And in addition to that, you have the California Coastal Commission, which has said we will never allow people to build homes on PCH again.
God,
So
it's
what
just
does that mean for the people who've had their homes on Pacific Coast Highway for 30 and 40 years?
the whole thing is just a catalogue of disasters. I mean, I think that I just to give some structure to it, Kennedy. What I would say is that if you look at what's gone wrong, both in the long term policy failures that led up to this, and then the short term incompetence and mismanagement, but also policy failures, I think there's it really is evidence of what I've been saying for years. I mean, people should know that I've been, as you touched on it, I've been focused on California policy for years now. I started an organization called Golden Together,
Yeah.
which is the mission is to restore the California dream. And we've been publishing policy reports on forest management, on water abundance, on how we can reform our building codes and regulations so we can build things more quickly. So we've been working on all this for years. And also, if people don't know, I mean, I'm a policy guy. I used to work back in the day in the UK government. I was senior advisor to Prime Minister David Cameron, so I know this stuff. So the structure, I think, for thinking about this is that what's been going on in California, exactly as you say, with this unchecked one-party rule for now. I mean, it's 25 years now the Democrats have had total control of the state legislature. 15 years they've had that, plus total control of all statewide offices, and they run all the biggest cities, both in terms of the mayors and the city councils, so the board of supervisors, and then the counties. So what you've seen is this terrible combination of incompetence and ideological extremism. Those two things are what's been driving this, and what they've really added up to is just totally the wrong focus. So if you just look at the anatomy of what happened in Los Angeles, so there's really the two parts have come together, which is, why was this fire allowed to burn so terribly out of control? Why was it so bad? As many people have pointed out, these Santa Ana winds are not, it was unusually high, but it's not
Yes.
unusual that it happens at this time of year, etc. Well, the reason goes back to something that happened in the year 2000, which is the California Air Resources Board, part of the bureaucracy in Sacramento. They issued new rules on air quality, and that meant that you couldn't do what you used to do for as long as anyone can remember, which is prescribed burns, which is managing what they call the fuel load. And in the Sierras, in the mountains, that means thinning trees and cutting down the trees so the forests aren't overgrown. And in geography like you have, in terrain like you have in Los Angeles, it means clearing the brush. And that used to happen. And for example, I was speaking to someone who's a long-time resident. They said, look, I remember when I was, not that long ago, a few decades ago, often you'd be driving on a freeway around Los Angeles or whatever, and there'd be public service announcements saying there's a fire on that hill. Don't worry, don't call it in. That's us managing the terrain. That used to happen. Since 2000, that was stopped because of environmental regulations. And so that is the direct result of an extremism when it comes to the environment that says we can't balance things, we can't do trade-offs. And then you look at the water, the other end of the scale in Los Angeles. There's almost the defining example of the utter dysfunction was the fire hydrants running dry and no water. Well, what was that? It was just, again, the ideology and the incompetence. The ideology is that you have all these people in the fire department and in the Department of Water and Power, it's all on tape, going on and on about how their priority is equity, literally saying my priority is equity, not making sure we have water supply, but equity. So that's where their focus is. And then you look at the incompetence. So for a longer time, that reservoir that was empty, the Santa Ynez Reservoir that everyone's been talking about, which needn't have been empty, and it's scandalous that it was empty during peak fire season, and they didn't tell the fire department. And one of the other people that was involved in what I did on Monday in Los Angeles, my press conference where I laid out some specific ideas for what we can do, the retired fire chief, he said to me, um, if we'd have known, if they'd have known, they could have called up, because it's a quarter of the water supply of the city. It's a huge amount.
Yeah.
And he said, well, we could have called up mobile water tenders. I said, you know, those giant trucks. I said, well,
They were not there in the Palisades, and that's I think, you know, that is an impeachable, recallable offense for Karen Bass,
unbelievable.
who said the tankers were there. It's like the tankers were not there because
No.
firefighters had to abandon entire neighborhoods because there was no way for them
100%. They were not there.
to get control of any of those lines, which were consuming massive swaths. Like and the Palisades is laid out. You have hill sections and you have grid sections. People in the grid sections are like, you know, we have not chosen to live in the hills. The hills are where the wildfires are. You know, we
Yes.
should be pretty safe. We're in the middle of
Great
what
point.
should be a well-protected town, which is bookended by 2 fire stations in the Palisades. They had to let them burn because they didn't have enough trucks. They didn't have enough people.
Exactly.
There were people who showed up to their fire station, and there were no trucks to man to get to the fires. But for Karen Bass to leave the city, and this is going to stay with me for a long, long time because I'm not going to be able to move into my house for a couple of years, which sucks. I'm very happy that my family is alive. That gives me incredible comfort. I believe in God. I believe in miracles. I think it is a miracle that our side of the street survived when everything around us burned to the ground. You know, I listen to my neighbors as they cry and they can't get up to their homes to look through the rubble and to see if they have, you know, the silver spoon that their grandmother got when she was born, and, you know, a family cross and any sort of artwork or family heirloom or picture frame. They can't get up to see anything because everything was allowed to burn. And, you know, now the neighborhood is locked down. Karen Bass should never have gotten on that plane knowing the wind warning. And, you know, it's like, and I read this in the LA Times, her deputy mayor, who was in charge of police and fire, is on leave because he's apparently a crackpot and allegedly called in a bomb threat.
Yes,
So,
he's under investigation by the FBI. And again, just to be really precise, so there's no misunderstanding. The first warning came on January the 2nd of this absolutely massive risk. And then there was a localized version of it on January the 3rd, emphasizing the degree of risk. And then on the 4th, she gets on a plane. It's
yeah,
just
the second
unbelievable.
she got that second warning, like and all it takes is one spark. We know that from every wildfire in the
Yes.
state. It takes one spark. You know, it's a rock could hit a lawnmower and could spark and starts a conflagration that you can't get a handle on. And, you know, she didn't think to go, well, who's in charge of the reservoirs? Like, let's make sure everything is ready. Do we have enough trucks? Do we have enough people? You know, and you have to have someone who sees 2 steps ahead of them to mobilize everything. That's what leadership is. And if you can't do that, if you can't execute basic safety, you cannot be mayor.
I mean, it's just the exact equivalent of, you know, we see it all the time because we're more focused on it and it's more kind of vivid in a way in advance. The hurricanes, right? So you've got a weather map and you've got a hurricane out in the Caribbean and it's heading to Florida, you know, direct hit on Miami. And, you know, that warning comes on a Tuesday. And that we are showing it on Fox, right? Here's the hurricane, it's coming. It's got 5 days and it's going to get to you. And on Thursday, Governor Ron DeSantis flies to Africa. I mean, can you imagine?
No, he would have
Right.
been run
That's
out of the
direct
state.
equivalent of this.
Don't go anywhere. More Kennedy Saves the World right after this.
And then for him to then, after the hurricane hits and no one's evacuated and every home is ravaged, for him to start filling sandbags after the fact. That's the equivalent of what Karen Bass is doing.
Yep.
And Gavin Newsom, I think he's just as bad. You know, for their party line was all the reservoirs were completely filled. And it's like, we knew that to be false. And then when he's confronted with that, he just goes and pivots and blames local people.
That was unbelievable.
People aren't just kind of mad. And it's not just, you know, the few Republicans who are left in the state. It's not just like they're kind of angry. People are shocked and traumatized to their core in a way. And
Yeah.
Believe me, LA has been through it. I was there for the LA riots. I have lived through wildfires and evacuations and earthquakes and all sorts of unrest and acts of God. I have never, ever seen anything like this. I have never seen suffering in so many communities like I am now. And all you have is a mayor running away from concerned citizens so he can maintain his image and legacy so he can run for president. And Michael Rappaport made a good point. You know, Gavin Newsom has come out so forcefully that he's going to Trump-proof the state. Well, why didn't he fire-proof the state?
Well, yes, exactly. And again, I think it's so symptomatic because you've got the calamitous, you know, ideological extremism and incompetence and all the nonsense in the run up to it. And then even in the moment, they can't get it together. Both of these clowns. It's just unbelievable. I mean, it's really kind of basic, actually, just to be strong and solid and show some leadership and just carry yourself with a certain, you know, realization of what the moment expects. And instead, it's again, the way that Karen Bass, when she got off that plane, and just that bizarre, pathetic, you know, like the 2-minute silence, just freezing. And
Yeah,
not
the Sky
answering
News
questions.
reporter, like, do you have anything to say to your citizens? And she just
Absolutely unbelievable. I literally never seen anything like it.
I mean, but how could you either have no empathy and you're a cold-hearted sociopath, or you are completely incompetent if words escape you. Like, you are
Yes.
leading the city. Have something to say other than,
And
oh,
then
God, it was
Gavin-
wonderful. I'm so glad I got to make it to that cocktail party.
Yeah, I mean, it's just unbelievable. And then you have Gavin Newsom with, again, just totally missing the moment. I mean, wandering around, you know, waving his arms around. Oh, I don't know, Anderson, mate. Let's ask the local people why there's no water. And then, you know, his hands in his pocket. And then with that incredible moment where the distraught mother confronts him and he sort of doesn't even take his shades off.
He tried to run away from her. Like,
I
the
know.
longer
Get in the car.
footage, she's like, Governor Newsom, chasing after him. He runs away from her because he knows what's going to result. Like, that woman's pain and her voice and her sadness and her anger speaks for the tens of thousands of people who have been displaced, who don't have a place to send their kids to school, who don't have a home for their family, who, you know, have to let someone else take care of their pets because everyone I've talked to cannot find a place to live. Like, they are desperate. And, you know, luckily, a good friend of mine texted and was like, hey, I'm in Wyoming right now. My house is empty. And so I was able to move someone from the Palisades into his home. And there are good people like that who are looking out for each other. And thank God, because the government has failed them. I was on a call with Brad Sherman and his constituents last night. He's the congressman who represents the Palisades. And, you know, a lot of it was him congratulating himself. But, you know, there were also some outstanding questions. And he said that from FEMA, you can expect to get a check for $43,000. That's what you can expect to rebuild your home. Everyone gets $770, but you know, if you can prove your home was destroyed, you can get $43,000. I don't know how anyone builds a tent or a yurt with $43,000. And, you know, he said that there is a synagogue set up in the West Side Pavilion in Westwood near UCLA where FEMA is set up and people can go. But it's not enough. Insurance companies are running away from the problem as fast as they can. If they haven't already dropped people, they're doing whatever they can to not pay a dime. So where do we go from here?
Well, let's just talk about the insurance bit just for a second, which is, again, this is so important that, you know, as we've discussed in relation to the fire prevention and the firefighting and the water and all this is not a natural disaster, right? This is a man-made disaster, a politician-made disaster. That's the truth. And then when you look at the insurance crisis, that is not either something where you can say, oh, you know, terrible insurance companies. They've been driven out by Democrat policies and Democrat politicians. Everyone needs to understand that. The reason that so many people were dropped off insurance, or the, you know, over the last couple of years, almost every month, there's been some announcement of an insurance company either restricting coverage or dropping, moving out of the state entirely, whatever. All of it for two reasons. Number one, because of the massively elevated costs of rebuilding anything. So if something happens to a house anywhere in California, not just here, it costs 4 or 5 times as much to build anything as in a neighboring state because of the environmental regulations, the labor regulations. You've got to have union labor, which is 4 times as expensive as you could get it otherwise. The building codes that get more and more onerous every single year, insane, ideologically driven, mostly by their climate agenda. So it's so expensive to build anything. So that's why the insurance costs are going up. At the same time, the insurance commissioner, Ricardo Lara, who's an elected Democrat politician, has been capping the rates. So the insurance company is saying, I'm sorry, we just can't do this. You're making it really expensive to build stuff. So if we have to pay out, it's going to be much more. And at the same time, we can't raise the rates. So we're out. So they've been driven out by the Democrats. So the insurance crisis is on them as well. In terms of what we do next, I mean, in the short term, there's that is the key point, what you've just touched on. They're like, what am I going to do? What about my home? And so there's 2 aspects to that. One is clearing up the site, right? Because a lot, you can't rebuild where there's just sort of chaos and rubble and whatever. And here you come back again to the total lack of leadership. You have Gavin Newsom. I saw him the other day saying, well, it's very complicated and may not be a year till we can start rebuilding. I mean, what are you talking about? I spoke to Governor Pete Wilson, who was there, who was the Republican governor in 1994 with the Northridge.
He was the last
earthquake.
Republican governor.
Right, and you had these terrible earthquake, and he was told. We had a long conversation with him, and I've taken. He had lots of specific recommendations, which I've included in our policy paper, which people can look at.
Where can they find that? So
yeah,
Golden Together. Where can they find it?
Yeah, goldentogether.com. Golden Together, one word. .com, and if you look under policy, there's one at the end, the newest one called Rescue, Reform, Rebuild. So you can look at that. A lot of his ideas in that. This is what he said to me. He said, I was told by the bureaucrats and all the advisors that it would take 2 years to rebuild what had been destroyed, including the Santa Monica Freeway, key freeway in Los Angeles. 2 years. And he said, that's ridiculous. Why should it be like that? Let's do better. And so he said, they tore up all the rules for contracting, for putting out bids and tenders and whatever, and he put in a totally new invited bids, put incredibly loaded it to incentives to complete the job quicker. They got it done in 66 days. He was told it would be 2 years. He got it done in 66 days. So the first step is that kind of attitude to clearing it all up.
Yes.
So you can start rebuilding. And that is something, because people make the point that, well, it's lots of different houses and different contractors. You can't just press a button. That's true. But you kind of can press a button, as it were, for the clearing up. That can be done.
Yeah,
and should be
you're
done.
absolutely right. It is the red tape. It is the bureaucracy. It is going hat in hand to the city and begging for permits and, the side yard setbacks and, we don't have a plan for your foliage and, come back in another 6 weeks. So it's really hard for people to do anything under the current, and even Karen Bass, it shouldn't be this hard. It's like, yeah, lady, it should never have been this hard. This should never have happened. It should have never have been hard before this. And the resources to fight this basic service that the city is supposed to provide should never have been depleted. I encourage everyone to go to goldentogether.com and read some of these policy papers so at least you can get a handle on things. So, we can, as communities, work together, share things with each other, give your neighbors some reassurance, and this has to be a roadmap going forward. We have to have a better plan. Steve Hilton, thank you so much for your time. You are an incredible person, and you have been so kind, and you have, with your heart and your knowledge and your experience, helped so many people, and you will help even more. So thanks again.
Thank you, Kennedy. Good to be with you.
This has been Kennedy Saves the World, along with Steve Hilton. I'm Kennedy.
Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app. Oh, go ahead and leave me a review while you're there. I'd love to hear what you have to say. You've been listening to Kennedy Saves the World on the Fox News Podcast Network.